Welcome to the Cypher Podcast. Today we have a really good episode for everybody. A lot of people are talking about this. There's a TV show about this. But I think we have some pretty interesting remote viewing data for you guys to share that caught us a little bit off guard. We're pretty excited about this. So welcome everybody, and also my two co-hosts, David and Emily.
Hi. As Brett says, we've got some really juicy data on this topic. I'm really looking forward to diving into that and sharing that with you all.
Hi, I'm Emily, and I'm very much looking forward to our first topical show where we actually dive into some real research using remote viewing.
Yeah, I mean, this is definitely something that we're going to be shifting back and forth on. Our subject, though, for today is the Skinwalker Ranch. And there's a TV show that's been going on for several seasons about this already. Lots of strange phenomenon going in. Emily's going to give us a bit of an overview to what we're going to discuss here. But we kind of honed in on one part of the mystery. And we got some pretty strange and fascinating data. But maybe, Emily, you could talk a bit about what is this subject for those who don't know what Skinwalker Ranch is.
Sure. I'll start with a bit of a background in terms of the history of how we got to the sort of the modern day hype around this particular property. And I think I'll save a lot of the listeners, if they're not familiar with this, I do encourage them to go do their own research. There's a ton of resources online. So I'm really just going to cover at high level bullet points on what has happened in sort of recent history with the property, and then we'll get into our discussion. So the property, known as Skinwalker Ranch, is located in northeastern Utah. It spans approximately 500 acres, and it's a site that's reported to be full of unexplained and anomalous activity. And some of I'm going to list a few of the really strange things that are going on there. It's certainly not limited to this, but these are some of the more prevalent phenomenon. There's cattle mutilations. There are strange lights, portals, UFOs, magnetic and electromagnetic anomalies, radiation anomalies, bizarre health issues for those visiting the ranch, ghosts and hauntings, and large wolf and Bigfoot-like cryptids. So we've got almost the full spectrum of paranormal activity, and there's definitely been reports of all sorts of other things on top of this. So the name itself, Skinwalker Ranch, was derived from the Navajo word for shaman, a shaman who has specifically gone to the dark side, so to speak. And I won't get into that. Maybe we can talk about skinwalkers in a whole other episode, but it's basically like a witch-like individual left the tribe and gone off to do evil deeds. That's the lore. And the legend has it that there was a bitter feud between two Native American tribes, the Ute tribe and the Navajo. And as a result, the Navajo cursed this land, and with what they call the Skinwalker curse, and then this dark shaman is haunting the land. So that's a little bit about how the ranch got its name. At the moment, the most prevalent activity that seems to be recorded on the property is UFOs, as well as atmospheric, electromagnetic, and radiation anomalies. And we'll get into a lot more of that later in the show. So in terms of the ownership of the property, it had, in my research, there were many owners. The more relevant information, at least relevant to our story, starts with Terry and Gwen Sherman, who were cattle ranchers. They acquired the property in 1994. And the Shermans were really the initial owners that brought this into the public. They captured the minds of the public by reporting the strange phenomenon on the ranch publicly. So they basically brought the ranch into the public eye. After a couple of years on the ranch, things got a little bit too crazy for the Shermans, I guess. They decided they needed to move out and sell, and they sold the ranch in 1996 to a wealthy businessman named Robert Bigelow. Basically, he bought it specifically for scientifically studying the phenomenon on the ranch, and he actually formed an institute called the National Institute for Discovery and Science, and much of the information that his scientific research team collected is still classified. So some of it's known, but a lot of it is trickling out slowly, but much of it is just classified. Apparently he sold the ranch because the phenomenon seemed to be dying down, and they felt they'd exhausted whatever research they were going to do. And that was in 2016. They sold it to the current owners, and the current owners are actually recording a television show on the property for the History Channel, and we'll get into that in the after hours as well, along with our thoughts on what the motivations might be for the TV show, the current owners, and the various characters associated with this particular property. So I think that sets the stage nicely for our conversation in this episode.
Yeah, thanks, Emily. I think that's a great overview. And certainly there's a lot of other resources out there, from watching the TV show to there's books about this subject, and high strangeness on this land, from UFOs, cattle mutilations, hauntings. I mean, you name it. It's there. It seems to any high strange, quote unquote, paranormal, which I think most of us here on the podcast to say is just normal. It's just we don't understand it. Tends to take place on this in this location. So we took a look at it, but we're not the first to do that in the remote viewing community. There's several subjects. David, I think you're familiar with some of these. Maybe you could talk a little bit before we jump into our work of the work that's gone on. And I think there's even been some listings for jobs for some remote viewers. I mean, we're speculating a little bit, but it makes sense based on some of the stuff that's out there to go and remote view either for the owners of Skinwalker Ranch or something else. What have you found on that? Or what do you know about that?
I'm not aware of all of the work that's been done on it. Certainly, there was a recent one that the Hellfire remote viewing group did, and they focus on only the very weirdest and wonderfulest topics, which was looking at the hitchhiker effect, which is where people would go home from the ranch and then their families would get sick or have anomalous experiences themselves. Those job postings were unfortunately unpaid voluntary job postings for remote viewers, but they were advertised by a prominent, experienced remote viewer in the community on behalf of a business, and the registered address of the business is pretty much next door to Skinwalker Ranch. I don't know who's behind it, and I haven't seen any results come out of that yet, but perhaps it will be in the next season of the History Channel.
There's one other data point from that as well, which one of the prominent remote viewing instructors out there, Paul Smith, who is part of the military program, he has a summit coming up where one of his presenters is Eric Bard, who is one of the scientists on the TV show. And well, it makes me wonder if Paul has done any work for the show as well. I think it's we'll talk probably a little bit more about this in the after hours, but have they released any of that data yet, David?
I don't believe so. I just wanted to note Paul Smith's conference that's coming up. His talk there is entitled "If You Absolutely Positively Must Remote View Bigfoot: How to Responsibly Engage in Remote Viewing Anomaly Targets." And Paul is someone who's always very down to earth and grounded and doesn't go off the deep end with this stuff. So it's interesting that he's now tackling this topic at a time where we've also got one of the Skinwalker scientists at the same conference. Perhaps it's just a coincidence.
Perhaps it's just a coincidence, or we're not the only remote viewers looking into this, because it's such an interesting subject that you have parties involved that are using what appear to be the scientific method, at least the best of our ability to see on television. but we decided to look, and we got some interesting data, I think, that paints a narrative and a story about one aspect of the ranch. And I think that aspect is a little bit more related to the UFO side of things. Emily, you're the one who tasked us, and David and I ran this blind. I did a pen and paper session. David did a pen and paper remote viewing session. And then I also did an ERV session. But maybe you could talk, Emily, about what you tasked us before we go in and describe our work.
So for our research in terms of remote viewing for this episode, I tasked Brett and David to look into this area of the ranch known as the Triangle region. It's a section of 3 roads that come together at a crossroads, and all of the activity, especially the activity we've seen in the TV series, it seems to be centered on this area, and it seems to be in the atmosphere above this particular location. At least that's where they're doing all of their scientific research. So the task was to go to this area and look at the most interesting event that's occurred within the last 3 years, and then go into the both origin and purpose of this event. And I think Brett did a wonderful job with one of his RV sessions, actually identifying that particular event that is going to be the starting point for our research. Brett, can you go into that a little bit for us?
So this first session, this one is the pen and paper session, and it was very, very straightforward what I got. Just for those that are not remote viewers, I ran this session completely what we refer to as blind. I had no idea what the tasking was. This could have been anything. I just was given a set of numbers and described what came into my mind spontaneously. The session data began with a event of like a bomb going off. There was a very large explosion. I was getting a lot of heat, and it wasn't necessarily a bomb, but it was a very explosive event. And as I began to get more information about this, I was getting data around something going out of control, spiraling, and then ultimately crashing, and a bunch of people, as if someone were watching this from afar, going, "Oh no!" and something went terribly wrong. As I continued with this session, I got the impression that something was aerial. It was up in the sky, and there was an error that occurred. It was something that went wrong, and then that thing in the sky came back, hit the surface, and then would leave skid marks along the ground as it crashed. The high level data from that, I drew a sketch, and it was very simple. It's a very diagrammatic sketch of these rings that were up in the sky, and something that I described as a experiment that ended in a disaster that was related to a rocket. It was flung and propelled, and it missed the target. I have it missing, and then it was flung and it crashed. Well, what was the thing that happened in the sky above this area? And it seems I described some sort of an experiment with a rocket.
Yeah, so the really interesting thing about that session, Brett, is that looking at the last season of the show, I think at the current time of this recording, the last season that was out was season 3. One of the major tragedies that they reported in the show was that this rocket that they'd sent up, I think they'd actually sent up 2, one that just almost blew up just right above the launch pad, and then one that actually went up in the sky. And now this was a no wind evening. There was no wind, nothing, not a cloud in the sky, and it goes up a certain height above the ground, and then it seems to take a very sharp turn for no apparent reason off into a completely different trajectory. And I think the rocket landed miles away. It was expected to land within a few hundred yards of the launch area, and it was just completely off its trajectory. And it was on one hand a giant disaster because they didn't get the data they were hoping for. On the other hand, it confirmed that there seems to be a very strange phenomenon in this triangle area in the atmosphere. So depending on how you look at this, the experiment was either a disaster or a success, but it certainly didn't go the way they'd planned.
And this is an interesting thing I think about this session. We have the known information, which I'm describing as it's a disaster, it goes wrong, it's like a bomb went off, and then something ricochets. And it's these 3 rings, and I'll be discussing a little bit more about this later. These 3 rings actually show up again in my ERV session when I was looking at the origin and purpose. I guess it's a good starting place before we look into some of this other data. Maybe that's a good place to move into David's work on the subject.
So my session didn't really dwell on the rocket event. I have an energetic process going on, but I think this is probably picking up where Brett's session ended. There's this really interesting phenomena with remote viewing where when you have multiple viewers working the same target, you end up sharing the load and different people describe different aspects of the target. So I'll quickly go through my summary. I've got a life form, which I described as life, Jim, but not as we know it. And it's in a closed-in context. It could very well be underground. And I described it as spread out over a broad range of time and or space. I had an AOL, which for people unfamiliar with the term is kind of an imaginative label upon the descriptive data, that it was like ants or termites or bugs or something, but it was sort of life that was a bit spread out somehow. Anyway, this life is hidden away in this closed context, and there is a subtle event, and the effects are much more noticeable than the causes. And if you think of that rocket bouncing off of apparently nothing in the sky, that was a very noticeable effect, but they still don't know what happened. The cause is unknown. So there was an emotional feeling from this life of watching and waiting with frustration, and the phrase, why hasn't it arrived yet? Which maybe doesn't make sense now, but I think it will corroborate what Brett got in his ERV session. We got multiple locations relevant to the target, radiating out from a central location. It's a steady, slow, persistent, plodding process. And finally, I've written that a key theme in all of the data is hidden. The part of this which can be seen is not all that's going on. Like watching it on TV, either some information is lost or there's an interpretive aspect to it. So only one aspect is visible and the rest are hidden. So we're looking at a kind of final product or result that's a coming together of these subtle hidden things, and then we just see like the tip of the iceberg coming out of it.
So I also had a chance to read over both David and Brett's sessions, and one of the things that really stood out to me from David's session was there was a diagram, David, that you did that had a funnel-like effect, and I wonder if that ties in, if the funnel ties into those concentric circles that Brett got, or if maybe it's something else. But do you want to talk a little bit about the diagram on your session?
Yeah, this was associated with the life that was, the life wasn't just like a person would be stood there like a plain and simple being. It was somehow spread out in this quite unusual context. Um, I am not certain from my data whether this funnel thing is a purely physical thing, because I was looking at it and I was thinking, oh, maybe this is like a cave entrance, or even where on the show they drilled a hole into the side of the mountain and, found something in there. So I thought, maybe it could be a physical thing like that. But then there was a couple of things which just didn't quite ring true. It was, I suspected in my session that it may be non-physical, or at least partly non-physical, and it wasn't moving, this thing, and the life was kind of inside. So we've got like a funnel. I've drawn a section drawing. So if you have a funnel shape in the ground that goes down, and then you're in a wide cave with a space, and then an irregular layer of this life form on a dry, firm, uniform base surface, I wrote underneath. So it's really like there's this pile of life, or this spread life sat on a really sort of flat surface in a space below this funnel shape. But I wouldn't want to commit myself to as to whether this funnel is a purely physical phenomenon or whether there might be something stranger going on. I did say, well, I wrote this as an AOL, this isn't quite real. It feels like the future glittery. Um, there was something I couldn't quite put my finger on in here that was unusual. Because this funnel thing is associated with the life. I didn't describe this as a separate aspect of the target. Yes, this thing I couldn't put my finger on. I said it has something broad about it. It's doing something over a large spread of time or space. Um, and the life is very linked to the space it inhabits. Like it wouldn't be here if that context didn't exist. Or maybe even the other way around. But it's under, beneath, it's hidden away. So I think, yeah, I haven't got any more data on the life.
Yeah, thanks for that insight, David. I think that some of this information will make the puzzle pieces will start to fit together a little bit better once we see Brett's ERV session. I did want to ask you to explain one thing to the listener. I heard you mention the term AOL, and for those listeners who are not remote viewers or know all of the remote viewing terminology, do you mind just briefly explaining what AOL means?
Sure, it's not the ISP who sends you CDs through the post. It stands for analytical overlay. In remote viewing, we always aim to describe, not name. So if you are having stuff coming into your session that's it's a this, basically nouns, then that's generally your imagination matching onto the descriptive data. So we take an AOL break when that happens, write down what noun we had essentially, and then carry on with the session. And the theory is it kind of acknowledges it, gets it out the pipeline, because otherwise, if you just try to ignore or suppress that stuff, it can kind of stick around and corrupt the data.
Thanks for that explanation, David. I think without further ado, we will move on to Brett's ERV session. And Brett, before you get into the ERV, did you want to give us a little bit of a background maybe for the listener on what is ERV? I know it's a methodology or a method of remote viewing, but maybe you could give us a little bit of a background so that we're all on the same page.
Yeah, so remote viewing typically is associated with doing a pen and paper method where you're writing down perceptions in a structured order about whatever tasks you've been given blind. So the viewer's only given a set of numbers. You go through a specified structure, you collect data that arises in your mind spontaneously, you end the session with some data and with some sketches. An ERV session is different from this because an ERV session, you're actually putting your body right up to the edge of sleep while keeping your mind awake. And I've been practicing this technique for probably over 7 years now, remote viewing, doing the pen and paper technique for about 12 at this point. But this is different because as opposed to writing things down and declaring AOLs, as David just described, when you're doing an ERV session, what you're experiencing is kind of like a movie that's taking place within your mind's eye. And so what I'm about to describe are the images that I saw, as well as the context that I was perceiving from beginning to end of this ERV session. And it was a movie, I'll tell you that. This data, it's not what I expected when I was giving these numbers to go on a little bit of what seemed like a sci-fi adventure when I was given these numbers. But we have no feedback for any of this. So I think the responsible thing to do with this work is to view it as an interesting story that may have some elements of the truth in it. It may be exactly right. It may not be. It's hard to know 100% because it is completely non-feedbackable.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good explanation. We can have subsequent shows where we go into just some of these various methodologies within the show's entirety, if that's some feedback we get from our audience. But I think that sets it up nicely for today. So Brett, do you want to just jump right into it and get into the spicy sci-fi story that you had? Yeah, I'll let you take it from there.
So the session began, and I'm always looking through my own eyes, typically. But I was in what appeared to be a desert environment, was where I landed, so to speak, with the ERV session. I saw large sand dunes. There's a lot of tans and oranges, and like I got dropped right in the middle of the Sahara Desert. And there was some very futuristic looking buildings everywhere that appeared to be made out of what looked like metal. All the buildings looked like the kind of construction you'd see from the Sydney Opera House, where everything had really interesting curves. There was a lot of peaked structures that also looked very futuristic to me. And there was a center path right up the middle of them towards a much larger structure that was round. It looked like a large circle from the top. And there was a glass window that went like a 360-degree view on this elevated perch looking above the desert. And so I just kept moving my position along the path up to this structure. It seemed to be what my subconscious was trying to point to as significant. On the inside of this structure, it was a completely open, round room where there were levels of seating going down. And on each level, there appeared to be multiple workstations where life forms were operating terminals And what this really looked like to me once it became clear is it looked very similar to a staging room when they're launching a rocket. And I'm sure many people have seen these, whether it was like the moon launch or even SpaceX launches, is that you have about 40 different people in a room, all behind their specific terminals doing their job. And then up in front of them all are these massive LCD screens showing launch trajectories, showing important time data, all this information that's really relevant to what their mission is here. I took a look at the screen and I couldn't make out any English words on it. In fact, all the symbols looked very foreign to me. I have had a lot of success in the past of seeing accurate English letters. This was completely foreign to me. Something that I expect straight off of an alien spaceship or something like that if they had an LCD screen or a holographic display. But the impression when I prompted myself with what is on the screen is metrics and trajectory data. And so another impression I had, I had a recording, very sciencey, but not definitely more future science than modern science. And then at the end of this, it was showing me this series of rings, and I think these were the same rings that showed up in my pen and paper session that were above the atmosphere of Earth, seemed like in low orbit. And this was a technology that was being worked on. I felt like it wasn't finished. I felt like where my perception position these were tests that were going on to see if some agency could get this to work. And I asked myself the question, well, where is this in relationship to me now? What I got very specifically was that I feel ancient to whatever this is. I was getting this impression, if anyone's ever seen how a railgun works, is that it's pushing an object through one ring and then another ring and then another ring to go faster and faster and faster and faster, but directly at the atmosphere and towards Earth. So it was like this cannon in space was pointed at the ground from space and launching something through them. But it wasn't just going through the local environment, it seemed to be moving through time. What I was getting is that this wasn't about traveling distance, that this was about traveling through time. And I had this phrase come into my awareness of a vorpal net. And I believe vorpal actually is associated with death. And so something bad happening. I might be a little bit wrong on that, but that was my cursory review of that, is that something bad, a disaster happened in relationship to the use of these rings by this group. And where the cannon was launching this object, it was supposed to get slowed down and stopped. But for whatever reason, that didn't occur. And the end result was the launched object ended up missing this net and inside of the ground on Earth. And where I ended up was looking at what I just described as above. It was kind of like a drone shot looking down at the land. I was no longer in this desert environment anymore. It was kind of more of an arid, more high desert type look. And I'm looking down at a triangle area on the ground. We do this thing in ERV session, well, a lot of us do, where we like to land. We do what's called a superhero pose. So you kind of have your head down, you put your knee on the ground wherever you are at the site, and you feel the ground. Like, what am I feeling? Am I on dirt? Am I on cement? Am I inside a building? Am I outside a building? And you try and get your bearings before you then allow the rest of the scene to increase in fidelity, visual fidelity. And every time I tried to do that, because I started from this drone view and trying to land on the ground, I kept getting a repulsion. Like, it kept pushing my perception position back up into the sky. It's like a magnetic force kept repelling. It was kind of the sense. And so it took a lot of intentional focus. No, this is go here and hold stationary. And so it took extra focus and mental attention to actually hold that perception position without getting pushed away. I looked around and I didn't really see much. It just kind of seemed like there was nothing there. There was a road, there was some greenery, some shrubs. I did look up, the final thing, if I don't see anything on the ground, I looked up in the sky, and that's where I noticed the first strange thing. And it just looked up and there are all these dots in the sky, which to me felt when I asked myself, well, what are these? My intuitive response was there's a bunch of cameras just hanging out from all these different groups. None of them are necessarily related to one another, but they're keeping track on this location for some reason. And everyone's got their little microphone or little CCT camera or whatever they are, just to, if anything happens here, they're going to know about it. And there's a lot of them in the sky monitoring this location. So I said, okay, well, nothing's going on here right now. So where should I move to? And in an ERV session, you can have a semi-transparent perception through solid objects. And that's what appeared to me. So it's like I had an X-ray of the land. It felt like there was something underground in this area. And so it's like the top layer of earth disappeared from my perception. And under it, the thing I saw, the very first impression is it looked like a massive sound speaker had been buried under the ground. And so it wasn't rectangular like you'd think of a traditional speaker. It was more of the circular part of the speaker had been buried underground. And then right in the middle of it, there was an opening or a hole, which had a light. First, it was flickering, but it would also be solid. And I moved inside, and my perception was from the inside, it appeared to have a centrifuge type of shape. So this would be like I was inside of a donut. You can interact in an ERV session. And so I decided to, well, let me put my hand on this and maybe I can perceive something. It's a non-physical hand, it's just my perception of my hand. And when I did that, I got extreme energetics. And then I heard a voice right after that as well, which caught me a little bit by surprise because I didn't see any life forms walking around or operating with this. But I heard a voice that said, "I'm sorry, I didn't make it." And after I heard those words, I was getting this impression that this was directly related to the previous images and scenery that I saw that was associated with that launch from space, and that this was the outcome. This is where the thing that was launched ended up. Because I was getting this impression that something or someone associated with this piece of technology was reaching out, trying to get a response from launch control, for lack of a better word. If you're an astronaut being launched by NASA up to a deep orbit or a moon or an asteroid, and then you lose contact with ground control, it's like I was getting that kind of impression. It was reaching out, trying to say, why is nobody answering me? Where's my support? Where's my assistance? And it's just getting dead air. And so I prompted that a little bit further. And what I saw was a face, and then there was a being behind it. It looked very robotic, though. The best way I can describe it is imagine someone were to take your brain, your skull, and your spinal column out of your body and then insert it into a piece of technology and then connect that piece of technology up to it. All the wires go up to your spinal cord. All these other things go right into your brain. And then your new body, so to speak, is this large round speaker that for whatever reason, tying it back into my earlier work, seems to be part of a time travel experiment. I got a very, very strong emotional response from this thing that was extreme loneliness and sadness. And it's like it had been alone for a very, very long period of time. It had been stuck. It doesn't have the ability just to get up and walk away. It's stuck inside this piece of technology. It can't get out. Its systems seem to have failed, but it is still aware and alive to the best of what I could tell. But it's not exactly in a great condition. It doesn't like where it's at. It seems to have failed its mission, if it had one, and it's just been sitting there for a long period of time, reaching out to ground control. Where am I? Where are you? Waiting to be rescued. But that rescue is never coming. Or at least that's been its experience so far. It was almost like a ET phone home type of scenario. Again, I'm just using these popular culture references because that's what I have to help me understand the information that was going on there. And I think that's the long narrative of this story. There was a message that it had, but I think we're going to save that for the after hours. And I think that's a wrap. That's my long story.
Well, that was quite the adventure you took us on. I think that in the after hours, we're going to, as Brett mentioned, we're going to discuss what message the being had for Brett. And I think we will get into some speculation as to how all these things tie together. How do we tie Brett's 2 sessions together with the ERV data alongside of the actual observed information that we have from the various sources, and then do a little bit of speculation about what might be going on here, as well as what are some of the motivations of the human actors and the human interests at this location, and we'll see where that conversation takes us.
Yeah, I think I did just want to add this whole session, to me, there was something which, for want of a better word, was a little bit screwy. There was something odd about its relationship to time or space or something. I'm really unwilling to commit myself about what's physical or what's kind of non-physical or higher dimensional, or I mean, we don't know what any of this stuff or this technology is, if indeed it even exists. But there was something really specifically weird about this target and its relationship to time and space, and I wasn't really able to put that into words. I could maybe throw throw darts in the dark and say it was kind of like it was maybe smeared across time, or existing in more than one time at once or so. There's if the events that Brett's ERV session described really happened, then those guys really screwed something up. Maybe a poor astronaut went splat in time as well as space. Because yeah, whatever this is very strange. I had the idea while you were speaking as well, Brett. All these phenomena at Skinwalker are not obviously related to this story, the sci-fi story that we've got. But if hypothetically this were to have happened and something is launched with some futuristic machine back in time and it somehow ends up going splat underneath Skinwalker Ranch, I mean, you could hypothesize, I suppose, that there may be side effects from that process. I mean, we don't know how time travel works. We don't know if it's real, but just hypothetically, if you explode a bullet-shaped spaceship back in time through something, it's probably going to make some waves. So maybe the phenomena that we're seeing could be a result of, it's like the shock wave from that event. This is wild speculation on my part, but it was just an idea that popped into my head while you were going through your session, Brett.
Yeah, I think if the data is correct that we're dealing with time travel gone wrong, it's not too crazy to then take the next step that, well, what else could then have gone wrong as a result of that type of experiment? So I think we're gonna, in the after hours, probably go a little bit further down that rabbit hole as far as adding our own speculation of what could be the reason, what could tie all these different phenomenon at Skinwalker Ranch together. And so if you want to subscribe to the show and hear us, you can go to remoteviewingpodcast.com. And there's a link in the description of the show if you would like to find us there. But other than that, we hope you enjoyed this second podcast. It was an interesting sci-fi journey, and I'm sure we'll have more explorations on this topic in the future. But until then, thank you, Emily. Thank you, David. This is the Cypher Podcast signing out.